Everyone has been absolutely raving about TCL's new QM6K, but is it really that good? Well, let's take a look at the 65-inch version that was sent to me today by TCL to figure out just that. Now, what should you expect out of it? Because we're talking about an entry-level mini LED TV, and if you haven't used one before, well, expect image quality likely somewhere between an older LCD and a brand new OLED TV. Because mini LED can shut off hundreds or even thousands of zones, you do get way better contrast and HDR imagery than any older LCD displays could ever provide, and that does remain true for the TCL QM6K. And in fact, I'll tell you this right now, despite the fact that we're talking only about hundreds of zones in the TCL QM6K versus some of the more premium mini LEDs having many thousands of zones, you'd be hard-pressed to tell the difference. This thing punches way above its weight class when it comes to image quality based on what you expect and the price. And speaking of the price, let's talk about the specs and the price here. So yes, this is a mini LED TV that's also a 4K 144Hz panel plus VRR, and is actually also capable of 1080p 288Hz if you're into that, and it is using a mini LED crisp glow HVA panel. So you should expect some pretty good native contrast ratios out of this display. It also comes with TCL's new AIPQ Pro processor, Dolby Vision IQ, HDR10 plus, HDR10, and HLG, which is awesome and honestly better than you would expect for a TV of this price point. And speaking of the price point, the 65-inch version I'm reviewing today, depending on sales at least, at the time of recording, was $699.99. And I'll be honest with you, a less than $700 TV at 65 inches with the amount of image quality and specs available on this thing is extremely impressive. And if they can deliver on the software front, it's gonna make a whole lot of sense why people are raving about this TV. And in fact, in terms of the input and output, I also do wanna mention it does come with 4 HDMI ports, 2 of which are capable of 4K 144Hz, and 2 others that are capable of 4K 60Hz, one of which is eARC. So with such a great price point, plus the 1-year parts and labor warranty, as well as such good specs, is this actually gonna be good? Well, let's jump into the testing. And first I wanna start off with the color. And I will let you guys know that this TV, upon first impression, does deliver pretty decent color, but it's not anything that I haven't seen before, and it's not gonna be up there with the highest end TVs on the market. TCL's more expensive models will deliver slightly more saturated and deep looking colors, but it's not a night and day difference, and this certainly does keep up. In fact, even surprises me in a lot of situations. Now, for those of you who want the detailed deep dive into this bad boy, well, I'll go over the CalMan results here in just a second, but for everyone else, feel free to skip ahead to the TLDR. But let's talk about those CalMan results. So actually, this thing is really good in SDR out of the box. I'm gonna be honest with you, it has some minor inaccuracies which can be very quickly addressed through the menu of the TV. And by the way, I'll have the best settings for this display linked in my Patreon in the description below, which also gets you access to the Discord where you can ask me questions directly. And after adjusting it, you get absolutely insanely good SDR accuracy, giving you a very faithful representation of the creator's intent. When you take a look at the SDR color accuracy, well, you can see at least in the Filmmaker mode, it has an average delta E of just 1.2, which is extremely good and very surprising for a display at this price point. Moving on to HDR, out of the box, it's in some sort of an eco mode, which does need to be adjusted, but after making those adjustments, it actually also has very good HDR accuracy as well. Now, in terms of the HDR color gamut, it does fall a little bit short of expectations, closer to an LGW OLED, but it's still gonna be enough to display most HDR content pretty well that's available today. Now, in terms of the HDR color accuracy, take a look at the results here. This is far better than even some way more expensive TVs on the market. So the short version is, look, the TCL QM6K looks great and is capable of displaying the vast majority of HDR content as the creator would intend. Not only that, but in terms of accuracy, the QM6K is far better than I expected. In fact, both in terms of gamma tracking, but especially for color accuracy, the QM6K often dethrones far more expensive TVs and the biggest brands. But now let's move on to the next section, HDR impact. And look, I'll be honest with you guys, on a budget range, probably don't expect to be absolutely blown away by HDR. And let's take a look to see if that's the case on the QM6K. Taking a look here at the peak window brightness measurements in a 100% and 10% window, you can see that the QM6K unfortunately does disappoint. In fact, it's all the way down there with honestly just ahead of the 77-inch LG C10 OLED, which is a much older OLED, and that's very disappointing to see out of this display. But considering the price point, can you really blame them, fellas? Moving on to real HDR content, it does actually follow a similar trend. In fact, this is the least bright TV that I've reviewed thus far. So I'm gonna be honest with you guys. Look, if you are looking to be blown away by HDR content, the best way to do that is to get the highest end OLED or mini LED displays that can get insanely bright. And this is just not one of them, but it doesn't need to be. This is a budget TV aiming to be used as a home theater TV. And if you're willing to control your lighting, the brightness will be good enough. And if you've never seen HDR before, and this is your first exposure to HDR content, trust me, you're gonna love it. But now let's talk about where this TV really excels, and that's in the contrast and the local dimming. TCL has nailed it. I'll tell you that right now. I mean, take a look at the results here on the contrast ratio test. You can see that the TCL QM6K is dethroning last year's QM7, it's dethroning my 98UX, it's dethroning the Samsung QN900F. These are way more expensive TVs, and that is insanely impressive. We're talking about in a very challenging scene for any display, an 11,394:1 contrast ratio. That might not sound like a ton when you look at the OLED result at the bottom, but for mini LED, that is insanely good for this price point. Now, that being said, there are going to be some situations where you could have some blooming and some challenges with micro contrast. I'll try and show you some pictures here, but yes, there will be situations where maybe text could have some blooming on it if you're in a light controlled room. Now, if there's a little bit of ambient light, you're not going to see this. But just do be aware, this isn't an OLED, so there will be a bit of blooming, and black won't always be the perfect black that you want to see like you do on an OLED. But regardless, I'll be honest with you, this was so good in terms of contrast for the price. In fact, in my opinion, it does better in terms of contrast, at least on my unit, than my unit of the QM7K did. So the QM6K on my unit, on this size, was better than the QM7K in terms of contrast. And in my opinion, contrast is the largest contributing factor to image quality, and you should take note of that with the QM6K. And by the way, if you're thinking of buying the QM6K, I'll have affiliate links in the description below for your convenience and, of course, my benefit. But now let's move on to the next one, clarity, finish, and ambient light handling. One thing that plays a big role in the clarity of the TV is the coating, and unfortunately the QM6K sticks with a more affordable semi-gloss finish rather than the better looking and more clear glossy coating that you see on the QM7K. What this means is you will still get all the same reflections that you'd expect on a full glossy coating, however you don't quite get the full clarity. Now, you will still get improved clarity versus a full matte coating, but it could be improved. Also, the panel does not have a regular RGB layout, so some text might be slightly less crisp than other IPS-based RGB panels, but again, you're likely not going to notice this. Next, motion and 24p judder control. Look, fellas, I don't know about you, but I cannot stand the stuttery 24 FPS footage in a lot of films. Does this TV handle it well, or is it something that you should be turning off and never touching? Well, on my unit, I do think it actually did a pretty good job of reducing judder without introducing too many motion artifacts or other issues, but I did notice some problems, especially on a de-judder setting of 10 or other high settings where the processor is significantly strained. You could see some artifacting and other issues that could make a film less enjoyable. So if you're looking for the absolute best motion interpolation, is the QM6K gonna be it? Probably not, but it does a pretty good job, and I've seen far worse from far more expensive TVs. Next, let's talk about the gaming performance. The TCL QM6K, look, if you're gonna hook up a console or something, I think you're really gonna enjoy it. Take a look at the motion performance here of the QM6K. It does a pretty good job overall of not having massive trailing, but if you do zoom in, you are gonna see there is some trailing behind the object, and it does seem the objects in motion do get slightly darker, which could be a bit distracting, especially when you compare it to something like the LG G4, which at the same 144 Hz refresh rate just looks a whole lot more clear and bright in motion. Additionally, when you take a look at the latency chart here, you can see that while it's not the fastest display in the market, it's also not the slowest, coming in at 34 milliseconds of total system latency. This is likely going to be fast enough for the vast majority of buyers, but would I use this for PC gaming? Probably not. I would stick to an OLED for PC gaming for the faster response times and input latency, but for the vast majority of buyers throwing a console on this thing, I think you're going to enjoy it, and there's not going to be any major issues or massive contrast loss that at least I noticed in the game mode. Next up, let's talk about the viewing angles in uniformity. Look, viewing angles are a big deal this year, and the QM6K does a pretty decent job considering its positioning, but it does still have some issues. When viewing from a significant angle, there is significant desaturation as well as loss of brightness and color. This makes the QM6K not my first pick for theater rooms with wide viewing angles, or maybe you have a seat way off to the left. And look, if you're doing this, I mean, first of all, maybe don't do that. But if you are going to do that, definitely go with an OLED. You're going to have better viewing angles, or maybe step up to the QM8K, which has the wider viewing angle panel. But for most people who have a single couch or maybe an L-shaped couch, I think this won't be too much of an issue for you. Just be aware, if you have one of those very popular L-shaped couches, the one on the L is not going to have the same viewing experience that you will straight on. Now let's talk about the sound real quickly. You know, surprisingly, in terms of the sound, this TV actually performed far better than I expected. In fact, it even did better than my QM7K, which should hopefully improve with firmware updates soon. But in the current state, yes, my QM6K actually had better audio than the QM7K. Just take that for what you will. Don't get me wrong, it didn't blow me away, but the timbre was fairly solid and the body and bass had decent quality as well. I did notice some distortion at higher volume levels, but I think most buyers will find it good enough. That said, as always, I would recommend some sort of sound system to pair with it to get the most out of your purchase. The one thing TCL has been nailing each year is the operating system. Personally, I'm a big fan of Google OS, which is what they used here, and once again, it works flawlessly. Every TCL TV I have used absolutely zips through the menus, and the QM6K is no different. So the TCL QM6K, is it the perfect TV? No, it's not. It's a great TV, don't get me wrong, but it's not perfect. It has some issues with viewing angles, it has some issues with blooming, it has some issues with motion for gaming. It's not going to be the absolute best, but all of those issues have been significantly improved from even previous generation models, and even some of those models that are higher end versions. What I'm telling you is, while the QM6K is not the perfect TV, and to be clear, the perfect TV doesn't even exist yet, it's actually really good. In fact, it's shockingly good. The color accuracy is insanely good. The contrast for the price is insanely good. The brightness, could use some work, but also the price and the overall picture that you're getting is insanely good. And for that reason, I'm gonna be honest with you, this is the most excited I've been for a TV review in some time. Look at my eyes. Look at these dead eyes. They have a slight glimmer of hope in them, because I'm hoping that this TV can bring you the image quality you've been looking for at a price that's reasonable, something that's been getting tougher and tougher. This TV does it. It's a really, really excellent TV for the price. I could not recommend it anymore. I'll have affiliate links in the description below. I am telling you, if you are on a budget and you're looking for a mini LED TV, if you're willing to put up with a TV that's not maybe super, super bright, I have to recommend this thing. Just like, go buy this thing. The price is insanely good. It punches way above its weight. And this is overall, I would say, honestly, an excellent TV. In fact, it's so good for the price. I'm gonna give this the highly recommended 9 out of 10. Go buy this thing and stop watching this video. But if you do want to keep watching more of my videos, make sure to get subscribed for everything else display related here on The Display Guy. Whether you're looking to connect a new console, gaming PC, or just need a fast and reliable HDMI cable to connect over long distances, Rupro has you covered with their certified 8K HDMI 2.1 fiber optic cable, available in sizes up to 50 feet and can deliver a perfect full 48 gigabits per second connection over distances other cables could only dream of reaching. And now Rupro's offering a new detachable and upgradable pure fiber cable that sends the same 48 gigabits per second signal through its ultra thin and flexible housing housing, making it easier to route through walls. So if you're in the market for a cable that can drive a beautiful new TV or monitor, be sure to check out RuPro on Amazon today.